It's just real quick, just kind of get a feel. I'm making the assumption that probably everybody in here, or 90% of everybody in here, is a pilot, or at least a helicopter pilot, right? Just a real quick survey by show of hands. How many actually either fly like a remote control or a quadcopter or something for hobby? Okay, so we have a few. So this morning I'm going to go over what the FAA is working for the UAS integration into the national airspace. My name is Bill Crozier. I'm the deputy for the Unmanned Aircraft Integration Office. I work for Jim Williams. So I'm here on his behalf today, and he apologizes for not being able to make it. When I got the task to come, my first question is, well, what will the audience want to know? If they're manned pilots, one of the things they're going to want to know is, what's the FAA doing to keep unmanned aircraft from getting in a position where it could cause a safety hazard to manned aircraft? But as technology grows, groups like this also tend to want to know, what would I need to do if I wanted to further my business or my hobby with unmanned aircraft? So what you'll get from me today is a balanced view on the FAA's integration of unmanned aircraft into the National Airspace System, for both the manned side of the National Airspace System and for the unmanned side. I'll talk to you a little bit about the different types of unmanned aircraft systems. The commercial, there's the hobby and recreation, and also there's the public UAS that we deal with. I'll talk to you a little bit about what the FAA is doing, what we're doing now, what we're doing a little bit on the research side for the future. And then I'll finish it off with some things that the FAA feels that you can do to be helpful, and then we'll have some time for some questions. Okay? I'm doing the slides here. Down there, okay. All right. So first of all, I'd like to point out, UAS are operating basically everywhere in the National Airspace System with the exception of Class B. We do limit the flights over populated areas. And then also, some of you may know we have the charge from Congress to safely integrate UAS into the NAS by 2015. This is always a good discussion point, because this seems to turn into full integration of UAS, and that's not what we were charged to do. We were charged with safe integration, and that applies across the board for all, both manned and unmanned. I'd like to point out that UAS are integrated into the National Airspace System now, and just like manned, there are limitations placed upon them are really based on equipage and qualifications. So just like on the manned side, not every manned operation can fly in every class of airspace and do every type of mission. It's currently the same way with UAS. They're having limitations put up on them that are appropriate to maintain the safety and the NAS based upon their qualification, equipage, and where they're flying. So from this slide, just talk a little bit about the public aircraft first. So the public aircraft are the aircraft that are flown by the military, law enforcement agencies, universities, any organization that would qualify under a public entity. Most of these organizations do their own certification as far as crew members certification and equipment certification. And then we work with them on, like the military is a good example. There are rules that apply, operating rules that apply to the military. One of the examples is the rule under 91-113, which is see and avoid. Because they don't have a pilot with eyeballs in the cockpit, they can't technically meet that requirement. So we work with them and provide them a certificate of waiver to be able to do the safety mitigations for their lack of having eyeballs in the cockpit, so to speak. So most of our public operators get their authority to operate in the airspace with UAS through the certificate of waiver or authorization. Then we have civil aircraft. There are a number of ways that civil aircraft can enter the airspace. It's been in the press. The FAA doesn't authorize commercial operations. That is not true. We have authorized commercial operations. I'll cover some of those in a little bit. These operators can operate with a special airworthiness certificate in this experimental category, special airworthiness certificate in restricted category, which we have examples of in Alaska. I don't know, is there anybody from Alaska that operates in Alaska in the group? Okay. And then we also have an authority that Congress has provided to the Department of Transportation, and we coin it Section 333. It's more than that. That's just kind of the catch-all phrase for it. But that authority that Congress provided the Secretary of Transportation allows us to appropriately address the aircraft certification requirements on some of the smaller vehicles that wouldn't be prudent to hold them to the same standards or economical to hold them to the same standards that we do manned aircraft, or even add additional safety by making them meet the same standards as we do manned aircraft for some of those certification of the aircraft. With those approvals under Section 333, we do address the pilot qualifications and the operational safety to ensure that it's safe. Some of the commercial operations that we've approved in the Arctic using the special airworthiness certificate in the restricted category is a company going offshore doing monitoring of some of the ice and some of the mammals for environmental purposes, and also pipeline inspections. Both of those operations were approved with equipment that was military surplus, so it's operated under the special airworthiness certificate restricted category. The other thing that does is that gives us the ability, again, to place the appropriate limitations according to the equipage and the qualifications and the operating environment. Alaska is a good place, especially over water, because a lot of the operations over water are not safe for manned, seeing that the life expectancy is very short when the water is that cold. So unmanned aircraft are definitely a significant increase in safety and ability for the operations in the Arctic. So others that we have approved most recently, we've approved some commercial operations under Section 333 of the 2012 FAA Modernization and Reform Act. The ones that are approved are listed up there. We've done some motion picture, some agriculture. When I say agriculture, it's not Part 137 type, it's more surveying of crops. And aerial survey, flare stack. Flare stack, again, another good example where it's safety added. The companies don't have to close down the flare stack to get the person to climb the stack and do the inspection, so we can allow them to do these inspections without shutting down the plant and without putting personnel at risk, as is with a lot of cases for UAS use. I think to date we've approved maybe 14 of these. The first 7 were in the motion picture. We've also done some for construction, and there's other applications that are in the queue at this point. I think to date we have over 250 applications for the Section 333 process. I'd also like to point out that part of this process, the FAA utilizes the process in place for exemptions. As I mentioned, like for 91-113, there's a lot of other regulations that UAS are not able to comply with, or it doesn't add the safety benefit for them to comply with. The requirement for the aircraft manual to be in the aircraft doesn't really make sense, doesn't add safety, so that's one of the ones that we exempt also. And again, that is a whole other process under the Section 333. Other things to point out in this process is, again, we take into consideration the operational environment, the qualifications, and then we'll put in the restrictions to make sure that they remain safe. These have generally been low altitude, low risk, and Class G airspace. One of the things I know that the manned aviation side has shown some concerns with on these exemptions, according to the feedback we get, is the pilot qualifications. We have addressed the pilot qualification for these, and this has been a challenge for us because without a rule in place to address qualifications for small UAS, we're required to go by the rules that apply to manned aviation. So, the challenge is how can we say someone that's qualified with an ATP that flies a 747 is safe to fly one of these versus someone that is maybe 20, 25 years old that's been only flying these for 5 or 6 years or ever since they were 5 years old. So there's that balance, and we take the approach from a risk-based approach. Although these are commercial operations, we have granted exemptions to provide relief from a commercial pilot being required. And we've done the safety risk management on that and found that the difference between a pilot curriculum and getting trained and qualified does not, or for the commercial, does not require us to require a commercial certificate. It's just as fine with the private pilot. The key thing about the pilot certificate at this point that can also address the argument is that with a pilot certificate, it gives the opportunity for that person to be vetted for security reasons. So under Section 333, we are charged to make sure that it's not, a security risk to the national airspace, and by requiring a pilot certificate, we can meet that requirement also. And then also it provides the AirSense with the airspace and knowledge of TFRs, NOTAMs, and that type of thing. Okay, and I think I mentioned the low altitude. Generally, those are 400 feet and below. Okay, next slide. We talked about civil aircraft. Talk a little bit about model aircraft now. And model aircraft is one of the biggest challenges we have. And I guess the best way to kind of, depict the challenge is to, if you can imagine, I know a few of you raised your hand and said you fly remote control. The traditional hobbyist that flies a remote control aircraft, like when I was growing up and flew one, it's the person that goes out and they build their aircraft, they find somebody that will help them learn how to fly it so they don't crash it and waste all the hours that they put into building it. They do it for the love of flight and the challenge to overcome gravity through aerodynamics. With the quadcopter that you can get at Brookstone or off Amazon today, that's not the same motivation that hobbyists today have. There's very little skill required to fly. A lot of the technology with, you can fly them with your iPhone just by tilting your iPhone around. So the excitement from today's hobbyist is the one that comes from someone that wants to get the virtual joy of seeing things from 2,000 feet that they haven't seen before for relatively cheap, a small investment or a Christmas present. So they can take it out of the box and it's ready to go. So therein lies the challenge where the traditional had a lot of built-in safety that would just come natural with the motivation of the hobbyist and the tradition of the hobbyist, where the technology today doesn't have that built-in safety. So that's where we find ourselves watching the news with these things landing in very important people's yards. So again, Congress has provided us some guidance here. The same 2012 FAA Act under Section 336, they've kind of clarified what modelers are. Addresses that have to fly for hobby and recreation, and it also put a requirement on the FAA that we could not promulgate new rules or regulations that would apply to someone flying for hobby and recreation or the development of an aircraft for hobby or recreation. So the criteria out of the Section 336 that says what it would take to be a fly for recreation or hobby is just in general, visual line of sight. If they fly within 5 miles of an airport, they must notify ATC. And flying over the objection of the air traffic or airport operator, from the FAA standpoint, could be considered endangering the safety. The FAA expects modelers to know the existing safety regulations intended to prevent endangerment to safety. It also requires that hobbyists operate in accordance with a community-based organization and a programming of a community-based organization. under 55 pounds. If they're over 55 pounds, then the community-based organization must address the certification of that. And then they must give way to manned aircraft. So all these rules that Congress laid out is try to put where the model aircraft are in the box. We can't put new rules on them, but we still retain the authority and the mission to make sure that they don't endanger the safety. So the rules that are in place can still apply to them if they're an endangering safety. I already talked about the rest of those. So the next question, I've kind of outlined, how we deal with public, how we deal with civil, and then some of the construct around the modeling and the challenges that we face there. So what is the FAA doing? I guess up front, the important thing to point out is our main philosophy is education. We feel that if we can educate and get that education out, that will be the best enhancements to safety we can. We've partnered with a number of agencies, with AMA, with AUVSI, there's a small UAV coalition. We've published things like the Know Before You Fly. And I don't know if anybody Googles UAS FAA, you'll land on the FAA's webpage for UAS. And we've got posters on there that talk about what you should know before you fly. It's like do's and don'ts. Our industry partners have embraced this philosophy and have promoted the flyers and the information that we put out along with it. Also, there's been some confusion. There's been some litigations that have drawn into question the FAA's authority to impose penalties on ones that we feel need penalties. And which, by the way, as long as we're starting with the education, then we don't need enforcement. So that is always our intent, is to start with the education and handing out information, procedures on how to do it legally. If we do find that someone is a high risk or is not cooperative with us, then the enforcement action is still, as always, available to our inspectors in the field. So we put out the interpretive rule. A lot of work from our legal folks that put this out. This really just encapsulates all of the language that's out there and tries to say, what's a model. It talks about some of the references in 336. There's nothing new in the interpretive rule. So it's just a recap of the rules that are out there and how the FAA interprets those rules and will apply those rules. Law enforcement guidance, one of the things we've found, we've taken some lessons learned from the efforts from people pointing lasers at aircraft. So we've got a great relationship with law enforcement that was set up. They help us a lot on the lasers being pointed into the cockpits. So we've utilized that same relationship and done outreach to law enforcement. A lot of times law enforcement are the folks are the first ones on the scene. So we've given, I guess, I won't say guidance, but just kind of some constructs of what to expect, what some of the rules are, what our authority is, what their authority is, and we continue the outreach with them and have found that so far to be very beneficial. I mean, everything from interacting with events that happen at like sporting venues to someone that just had one get away from them and landed in a tree. So other thing is we're developing a process to do event tracking. We get a lot of reports. You'll see where the end when I ask some things that you can help with. So we are refining the data that we're getting and getting that database. And then the small UAS rule. Small UAS rule will address UAS under 55 pounds. We're hoping that we'll have the notice of proposed rulemaking out sometime this year with a comment period to follow. And there's not much else I can actually say about the small rule. Okay. I wanted to cover there. So now I'd like to switch over to some other efforts that the FAA is doing. I am not a engineer or researcher by background, so this is a little bit of a shift, and I'll just kind of pause here for a moment to give you an idea from the UAS Integration Office, we actually have three areas of expertise within the office. We've got the air traffic side that works with the airspace and the certificate of authorizations and waivers for us. We've got engineers that work with the engineering, the certification, the research side, and then we've also got the aviation safety inspector side. So with that in mind, I'll kind of shift gears and go over towards some of the engineering, research, standards, and that kind of thing. And the next few slides will relate to that, and I'll get through them kind of quick here so we can get to questions. So we have asked RTCA, Special Committee 228, for two things to help us with the standards. Two of the challenges that we found is the detect and avoid, and also the command and control. They're working on the standards for that. We're looking for their first product probably sometime early to mid next year. And I'd also like to point out at this time a lot of conversation about where is the U.S. as far as the advancement of UAS, and this normally comes from the industry side of UAS, but I'll get into some international stuff here. I feel that we're definitely making a lot of investment, a lot of time, and a lot of effort towards the non-segregated use of UAS. Everything before this slide is really the segregated. We're keeping them down low and we're putting restrictions on them, but we've got a lot of efforts that are looking out on the horizon into the future to work on that, that other part, if you will. A couple of other things. We've got ASTM that's working on some standards that they will give us those standards, and then we'll test them. I'll let you look through the slide there. They've got a couple of products on the design and construction. So again, they're just going to work on the practical consensus for U.S. operations that are an acceptable level of safety. Another group, SA International, Unmanned, they have an Unmanned Systems Steering Group, and we'll get input from them, review products. On the international side, we are involved with a couple of bodies on the international side, ICAO, which most of you are probably familiar with, and then JARUS. JARUS, we have a number of work groups that are stood up there, and they provide their feedback and input to ICAO. So our involvement within the Joint Authorities for Rulemaking of Unmanned Systems gives us an opportunity to be able to provide input that goes to ICAO, so we don't have to initially dress the group at ICAO. We can help take a consensus to ICAO. ICAO had the RPAS manual that they've developed that talks about standards and recommended practices. They've got a work group on command and control, and then also hazard detection and avoidance. The unmanned aircraft systems had a study group under ICAO. They've met about 15 times, published one circular, and then produced the draft RPAS manual. Recently, ICAO has stood up the RPAS, the Remotely Piloted Aircraft Systems panel. The U.S. chairs that panel, and the chairman for that panel is out of the UAS Integration Office, and then they've got a vice chairman that's out of the UK. So the panel coordinates and develops the standard recommended practices and standards, as I mentioned. A little bit more about JARUS. Again, develop proposals for all aspects of UAS integration. Their purpose is to recommend a single set of technical, safety, and operational requirements for the certification and safe integration of unmanned aircraft systems. And then they've got a couple of products. JARUS does not develop law or mandatory standards. Also efforts with EuroK, work groups there to address the detect and avoid, and then the C3 and the security focus. Last one, this is just kind of an eye chart for you to read through to show some other things that RTCA is working on with some of their special committees that also address UAS type issues or concerns. Okay, so what can you do? A lot of this stuff is common sense. Maintain vigilance, check NOTAMs. One of the things that we require of all operators is to publish NOTAMs. When I say all operators, so Section 333 approvals have that requirement, and the Alaska ops that we've done under the Special Airworthiness Certificate, a restricted category, also require those options. And then, if you see something that's out of place, then report it to ATC. But also keep in mind that, we get some reports, aircraft was flying, saw a, most people call them drones. We try to stick with UAS. Spotted a UAS, 300 feet above the ground, 2 miles out the left. Well, that may not be a problem. If that's an actual model or remote control field or something like that, it may not be an issue. But clearly, if they're a safety hazard or if it doesn't look right, then report it to air traffic, and that'll help us track those. Okay, so I know I kind of ran through it. I tried to cover, what the operations are, the what we're doing, like the here and now, and then also what we're doing as far as in the future to prepare for the non-segregated integration. With that, I would be glad to take any questions. Can't guarantee I'll answer them all because there's just so much information available. Yes, sir?
Yes. Currently, I can see that there's a lot of concern about UAS and how it fits with other aircraft. But essentially, the aircraft itself, currently, a lot of our safety design for certification of rotorcraft is based on assuring safety for the occupants. And when you assure safety for the occupants, you inherently assure a degree of safety for people on the ground. So, I mean, if I have a 40-pound UAS come through my windshield on the highway, that's a bad day for me on the highway. So really with UAS, the hazard becomes more, how do we address the hazard to people on the ground? And I haven't seen anything yet as far as the probabilities. Like in safety design, we always deal with the probabilities of events and hazards of events, and I don't see that end of it being addressed. How are those systems going to be addressed as far as safety and probability and requirement?
Right. So just to, thanks for a great comment, right on the mark. It's a challenge to say to an unmanned aircraft, someone that wants to go into business with an unmanned aircraft, that they have to have 6G loading seats. It doesn't make sense, and it doesn't fit the business models. Not that we're worried about the business models, but from a risk-based decision standpoint, we don't need to require that they have those standards to protect the occupants for the very same reasons that you pointed out. Now, we still have the responsibility for the safety of people and property on the ground. We still address and make sure that 91-119 is addressed, which is the requirements for maintaining safe distance of flight from persons and property on the ground. So we do address 91-119. A lot of the COAs and all public and civil operators are required to follow that rule, so that when it comes to the operational approval on where they fly, then we address that. So let me give you an example of the approval that we've done under Section 333 for both movie sets and construction. And also one more, law enforcement. So there's a number of law enforcement that have the authority to operate. So all of those operations have one thing in common, and that's that they must be able to control whatever is within that set. So like for the law enforcement, they have to set up a perimeter and control everything in that perimeter, and that's where that UAS can fly. For movie sets, if they're out on a location, then they have to cordon off that location and control movement in and out. Everybody that's in that perimeter must sign an agreement to accept the risk that the aircraft may pose to them.
But that's largely based on the equipment operating properly.
Correct.
Not the failure modes.
Correct.
We always have to deal with the failure modes and effects.
Correct. So on the failure modes on all of these, we require that they be able to demonstrate that upon failure, the behavior of the aircraft will not endanger. Trying to think of some example. There was an example on a movie set where an aircraft lost link, and the aircraft went to a return home mode, and it actually ended up not making it all the way back to the pre-planned point, but where it went down was still within the perimeter, and that was by design and according to the safety mitigations that were applied to that approval. Yes, sir.
Good morning. My name is Dan Folds. I'm with the National EMS Pilots Association. So we've got some concerns about.
You look like you have those written down.
Yeah.
All right.
We've got a couple of concerns about the proliferation of UAS.
Sure.
So we just want to make sure that everybody understands that for an EMS pilot, we typically land off airport.
Correct.
Perhaps on an interstate. When we land somewhere, there's a landing zone coordinator. He doesn't have air traffic control authority.
Right.
But that place, in effect, becomes an airport for that period of time.
Correct.
All right. It was just in the news that CNN was applied for and I guess given authority to operate the UAS. So if you imagine a mass casualty or a multi-car accident, say on I-95, that's going to be an attractive nuisance for a UAS operator who's going to try to fly his machine to get imagery
Right.
at the same time that a helicopter will be inbound to land.
Correct.
So we're concerned about that.
So the approval for CNN was not for CNN to go out and start flying the sites that they want to fly. It was in an agreement under a cooperative research with them and Georgia Tech to address the very issues that you brought up. And that is one of the things that we've found to be a benefit, is to partner with companies that want to comply. And a lot of times companies that want to comply or individuals that want to comply have the hard road. I mean, we've got those out there that, hey, I'm just going to go do it anyway. Those are the ones we're worried about. We're not the ones that worry so much about the ones that want to comply. So first of all, I would say don't worry about CNN and their approvals on that, because they're going to be, we're looking for their research with Georgia Tech to provide a lot of information that will help us out. So with the proliferation and the scenario you drew, like an accident site, that's another reason why we reach out to law enforcement. We have recognized that this is an issue, and it's not just for EMS, it's for firefighting too. We had an incident out west. Fire was going, 12-year-old takes his toy, flies it up, 800 feet, 1,000 feet. He has no idea that there's possibly a TFR. I don't think he was actually in the TFR, he was actually further out. But he flew up, got a nice view, kind of a panoramic of the horizon, the curvature of the earth on YouTube, beautiful. I mean, what kid wouldn't want to do that, right? So that's where it comes back to the education and the slide where I talked about the outreach to law enforcement. There's also the example in New York City where the building collapsed. Some guy comes in, I think it was one I remember about 6 months ago. Natural gas blew up, building collapsed. Some guy flies his unmanned aircraft. Law enforcement ran him off. So that's where our outreach pays off with the law enforcement and that kind of thing. So I'll definitely be vigilant, check NOTAMs, and then, the know before you fly. If you can pass that out, if you know people that are flying, then that would be helpful also. Thanks for your question. Yes, sir.
Hi, my name is Jeff Smith from the Eastern Region Helicopter Council. Two things. You made one comment about you would love for people to get away from the word drone and start using UAS. I believe to get to for the public to accept the whole UAS, I agree that you have to get off the word drone and come up with something besides UAS, because right now everybody believes that drones are the same thing they're watching on the news that are flying with missiles underneath them, and it's a very offensive weapon. And that segues into my next comment is what's going to be set up as far as regulations for UAS operators as far as the security of people in their homes and their privacy and stuff like that. Because when you put up their movies production, real estate, those type of things. I come from an area out in Long Island that has some of the most beautiful estates in the planet. And they're very concerned of just aviation flying over their homes. But when you start getting into this real estate and that kind of application, what are going to be some of those guidelines for people just buzzing over these people's houses?
Okay. So first of all, let me just say with real estate, again, they need to control everybody within that perimeter that they're flying. So if there's somebody in the house, then that company should have already taken care of any risk or notification of that. So just kind of put that out there for the real estate. But the privacy issue, I think, which is really the overarching concern that you bring up, I didn't mention anything about the test sites. I don't know, some of you may be aware, Congress asked us to stand up 6 test sites. We were ready to go with it, and then this privacy thing kind of caught us off guard and kind of delayed the announcement of the test sites. But we've since added that in, for a requirement for the test sites. We don't conquer privacy alone. We're working with a lot of the other in an intergovernmental body to address privacy. The challenge is that there's a lot of state laws that would apply to drones just as easily as they would someone walking down the street and pointing a camera in your window. So the privacy laws vary at the state level. We're addressing at an intergovernment level for the the privacy for the government side of it. So I don't know really how to address that other than there's some things that we don't know that we're hoping the test sites will be able to tell us. We require the test sites to have a privacy plan and to be transparent with the community in which they're flying. So a lot of the reactions that we'll get from that we may be able to share with the appropriate federal agencies to address if it needs to be addressed at that level. It is a concern, and it gets asked at congressional level and at the administration level.
Great, thank you.
How am I doing on time?
Great.
Okay.
Robert Grove with Garmin. During your presentation, you, at the end, went over various organizations that are working on different portions, ASTM, SAE, EuroK.
Right.
I think Eurocontrol was in there.
Right.
And I think I caught from the presentation that the ASTM was working primarily with the small UAVs,
right.
The under 55 pounds. But it appeared that there were several organizations working on the command control communication and
right.
the detect and avoid.
Right.
What's keeping those things coordinated so that we don't have...
Okay. Fair question, and our bosses have already asked that question of us also. So within the FAA, the engineers that I mentioned, we've got about 1/3 of our office is engineers. Within the FAA, we have the Office of Next Gen. Within that office, we have a focal point of contact to coordinate all the research. So we have regular briefings among all of the industries. So the Tech Center, the William J. Hughes Tech Center out in New Jersey is part of that effort. We also, which I didn't list up there, the Air Force has extensive investments and time and equipment towards airborne sense and avoid. The Army, I didn't list in there, has an extensive investment in the ground-based sense and avoid. So we interact with those bodies to try to share information. I know just last week we got the report back on, from the Air Force that did some of the, they've actually went out and defined well clear. The challenge, with a person in the cockpit, we say, well, if you can see and avoid, you're good. We don't have any other tests. We don't say, well, you have to identify something within 5 seconds, within 3 miles, or within 400 feet, or that's moving at a certain speed, or there's no standards on testing the eyeball other than can you see the bottom row, when you go in for your annual physical. So when we went to the electronic side, that proved a lot of challenges. So we needed to come up with something that was a good definition of well clear to define some of those parameters. NASA, the Air Force, the FAA, there were probably some others in the group. I wasn't directly involved with it. Came up with a definition of well clear. They took that definition, and this is an example, to a body that is the senior steering group for the executive committee without giving you the whole echelon. Jim Williams, my boss, is a member. He's now actually the chair of this senior steering group of the XCOM that has DHS, DOD, NASA, Homeland Security, and the FAA. So this clear concept was brought to that body to be coordinated and agreed upon at the senior level before testing continued. So there's a lot of back and forth. As I mentioned, the chair for ICAO comes from our office, so he sits in on the meetings like the senior steering group and the research meetings that the Next Gen office has with the Tech Center and their research partners. I'm not saying we won't miss something or we don't miss something, but it's the continual dialogue that keeps everybody aware on that. Is that helpful? Or were you looking for a lockstep process?
It doesn't really say how we're not going to have competing standards or competing, conflicting standards and operational rules, but it does have. Thank you.
So I don't know that we're trying to deter competing standards. I think there will be one standard when all the standards are brought forth for approval, but just like the test sites. So a lot of the testing can be done at the test sites. When the test sites were stood up, after they were stood up, probably sometime in about December, we provided them over 120 items of interest that the FAA is concerned, research items that the FAA would like to research. So, there's no money that changes hand with the test sites, so they can kind of use this as a menu and go to it and do the testing. The benefit is because there's different geography, climatology, airspace. What works in one place may not work in the other. So there is some, I think, healthy benefit to different bodies doing the research also. Okay.
I guess I'm next. It's a race to the microphone. Thanks, Bill. So you may have gone over this, but if we could go over it again. All the UASs that we see in the airspace fit into two categories, correct? They're either given an exemption by the Section 333, or they should be operating to the model aircraft rules. Is that correct?
So when you say the
Or they're in Alaska.
right, so there's no. Did you say types, or what was your question? Were you asking?
I
about
said
the types
all
or
the
type of
UASs
approval?
that we see
Okay.
in the airspace should either be operating under some sort of exemption.
Okay.
That's, I think there's 7 of them. You said 8.
Exemptions?
Yeah.
I don't know what the number of exemptions are.
Or they should be operating under the model aircraft rules.
Okay, so let me take a run at your question in this manner. So there's the public aircraft, public operators, there's civil, which would be the commercial, and then there's hobby and recreation. The approval that so I kind of look at, as far as like the approach to doing the approval, I kind of group them into those, because hobbyists, really, no additional rules will be applied to them. They know what they are according to the congressional language. The commercial, we're working, and so it really leaves just as far as the approval goes, the public and the commercial. With the public, what am I getting at? Who you are depends on what you need for the approval, right? It's not the same across the board. So for public, not all FARs apply, for example, to DOD. The ones that are all aircraft, the operating rules, they do apply. So with the military, we don't certify their pilots, we don't certify their equipment. The big thing with DOD that we give them the approval is 91-113, see and avoid, and that is done on a certificate of authorization or waiver. So you can kind of generally group public under that concept. Now, if somebody comes to us and they're like, well, we don't really have a program for certifying our pilots, DOD, they got all those resources, we're just a small company, we really don't have it, then we try to make sure that they can get a program, because there's other government agencies that have programs that are willing to share it. So we try to make sure they have something that's training. Law enforcement's an example. We don't certify their pilots, but yet they'll do a training program, and we'll go out and give them a training COA and go out and observe their training. So we know that they're catching all the safety concerns for the training. So not to lose track of your question, setting aside public now, which is really just the 91-113 approval with the COA. Then there's the civil, right? So set the public aside, kind of set the hobbies aside, right? Because we all know what hobby is, 55 pounds, follow the congressional language. The one that's left is the civil or the commercial. So that one has proved to become the challenge for us. There are a number of ways. Clearly, any of these UAS can apply through the current process that manned aviation applies for. That is available to them. But what businesses are finding is that for the smaller ones, that's not economically feasible. So I don't know that off the top of my head I could sit here and go through all the types of approval processes, but let me give you what the hot topics are on the approval processes today. Experimental, which is the same basically that we use for the man, and that is done through the Aircraft Certification Office in conjunction with our office. There is the Section 333. So with Section 333, again, that's kind of a catch-all phrase. Technically, you really need to divide that process into two. You've got the language out of Section 333, which authorizes the Secretary to approve them to fly with other than what's outlined in Part 21. And this all goes back to the risk-based decision-making process that applying manned aviation standards for certifying a 10-pound quadcopter doesn't make sense. So once that certification or that determination is made by the Secretary, that takes care of the certification of the aircraft, which, by the way, the FAA before Congress gave us Section 333 did not have the authority to get around that because that's statute, not rules. All right, so that's one part of Section 333. Then there's the other part, which when an operator must determine what FARs they cannot comply with, they apply for an exemption for those FARs that they can't comply with. It could be keeping the aircraft manual in the aircraft, where the aircraft registration is kept, the fuel reserve requirements, and there's probably a couple of others that I'm missing. But so we address those through our current exemption process.
But they would only need to go through that current exemption process if they plan to operate outside of the model aircraft hobbyist rules.
Correct.
Over 400
Correct.
feet.
Right. That's why I divided out the public aircraft, and I divided out the hobby and recreation, and I left the civil or the commercial.
Right. And the
Correct. So if they want to do it for hobby, then they need to follow the community-based organization guidelines, which it's really not any different than the mitigations that we're laying out for commercial ops. I mean, stay away from people that you could possibly hurt. Don't go near other airplanes. Stay below 400 feet. And that type of thing. Be properly trained.
Sure. So as Dan mentioned, below 400 feet and 5 miles from an airport is standard operating procedures for helicopter or ambulance
Correct.
operations. Are there any rules in planning or in place today that would restrict or would guarantee, would help ensure the separation of aircraft and UAS in that environment?
I can't speak to future rules, but there are current rules. Right now, the ones that we're authorizing, we ask to put out a NOTAM. We also require that they maintain visual line of sight and take the responsibility to see and avoid.
You
So
asked
they're
the
doing that from the
hobbyist to
ground.
put out a NOTAM? I'm sorry.
No. This is for the commercial.
Okay.
Because we don't approve hobbyists, right? I mean, they're already, according to Congress, they've got their guidelines. So, so I can go. I don't know exactly what hobbyists have as far as NOTAMs. I don't think they do NOTAMs, but I can actually answer that question.
Sure. So there's several questions. What are the penalties if someone is operating outside of the hobbyist rules? Are there any penalties for that? Like you said, the law enforcement chases them off, things like that.
Right.
There are no penalties for that?
Right. So, again, our goal is education. So if we find somebody that's doing something that's not safe or that's not in accordance with the rules, so to speak, or the regulation, then we reach out and try to educate that person. Most of the time when we do this, we get I got it, I didn't realize it. It's not, we don't get a lot of pushback.
Sure.
So we find that that's been successful. If we find, based on a risk assessment, that someone is a medium level risk or a high level risk, or that they're not cooperative, then as mentioned in the interpretive rule and in the current regulations, the FAA still retains the authority for civil penalties. And there's a lot of, there's a lot to go between going and talking to someone and that civil penalty, right?
Sure.
You've got an escalating menu of options to choose from.
So, in this environment, from some of the conversations we had yesterday, we're regularly interacting with these things. I mean, we're seeing them increasingly. I mean, this has gone far beyond the sort of the hobbyists of yesteryear, where they stay in these certain places.
Right.
Who do we call when we see these things? I mean, is that is just ATC?
I think the easiest is probably their traffic control, right?
Okay. There's no.
Or if there's law enforcement. I mean, so I don't always. I don't know what your communications are like if you're going into an accident site, but I imagine you're probably talking to someone not on an ATC frequent, probably someone off of a Motorola frequency hopping radio to the incident commander on the ground. You can communicate that with him and report it to him. And then maybe as you're going back, with the patient or later, when you get in contact with air traffic, then make that report to them. And that will get it into our database. But the immediate, I think, is to let the on-site incident commander know.
Sure. And finally, I appreciate your time. Are there any education products now? I mean, this is a fairly complicated system we're working on here.
Right.
Is there any place that we can go to disseminate the
Sure.
education? We need to educate a lot of folks.
So if you Google, and we appreciate that if you would get the information and pass it on, that's furthers our mission towards safe integration. It's and I probably should have brought the address here, but if you Google FAA UAS, you will come up to that website's actually pretty simple. It's www.faa.gov/UAS, and from there you will get a menu. If you look on the right, you'll see Know Before You Fly link. When you click on that link, it'll start out with a video that was endorsed from AMA, AUVSI, and Small UAV Coalition. Those are some of the groups from industry that have teamed up with us because they have a vested interest too. I mean, they want their products and their membership to be able to thrive and not get further regulation from the FAA, right? Nobody wants that. So we've found that industry has been very cooperative. So you'll find that video. You'll find the other documents we've published. I think the interpretive rules on there. I even think there's some FOIA stuff on there too. So that's where I would recommend that you go for the educational stuff.
Thank you. Thank you, Bill.
Okay.
We got one here. Hey, Bill, Lance Gant,
Can
aircraft
an FAA person
certification.
ask me a question? Is this okay?
What's that? Yeah.
Can an FAA person ask? No, I'm just,
I wasn't going to ask a question. I was just
well, I
going to
didn't ask you a question.
Is this a plant?
I don't know. We'll see.
No, just some additional information. You alluded to it, and going back to Eric's original question in terms of aircraft certification. So you mentioned there is a traditional aircraft certification process. You can apply to an ACO for traditional certification of one of these aircraft. The Aircraft Certification Service Small Airplane Directorate has been chosen or elected to be the focal for those UAS type activities. So under you can make application under special class Part 2117B, which is not new. It's been part of the regulations forever. So you can apply for traditional type certificate. There's a few applications out there, I believe, already.
Yep.
Notwithstanding the restricteds that were already approved, but then assuming you get a type certificate, I presume you would go off and go get a COA and all that kind of stuff, and
Right.
that's how you get operational approval. But the Small Airplane Directorate has developed some AC material that's only been seen internally right now, but that talks to really a risk-based approach to certifying these aircraft and the ground stations.
Thanks, Lance. Appreciate it.
All right, I have some questions from, well, I have a few myself, but from the internet, from one of the viewers. I heard there was a parallel UAS office that has been set up inside the FAA. Can you comment on this? And when was the new office established? Where in the FAA organizational structure is this office located? And what is its function or mandate?
Okay, so I can, I don't know about the parallel, but I can address what our current structure is. The Unmanned Aircraft Systems Integration Office, which falls under the Flight Standards Service, which is under the Aviation Safety Organization, was stood up a couple of years ago to be, the administrator stood them up to be the central point of contact for all things UAS. So AFS 80 or UAS Integration Office, and I think this is probably what the question maybe refers to.
Yeah, from the internet, yeah.
So the key thing here is that our office was not stood up to be a policy office. It was stood up to be a focal point for all things UAS. So when we have to face policy or when we have to face policy, then we go to the policy office to coordinate that. Our office is not successful because of who's in it. Our office is successful because we work with other organizations, similar to the question on research. A lot of the gains and significant things that happen aren't from people within our office, but our office helps. Just like the Small Airplane Directorate that Lance mentioned, right? We work with them on a daily basis to ensure consistency and one voice.
Okay. So basically your office is a resource to various entities that might want to address UAS issues.
Correct. Outside the FAA and also within the FAA.
Gotcha. Right now everything seems to be focused on line of sight. That's a requirement. Do you see in the future that there will be a system that will facilitate satellite-based controlled UASs like the military, where they're being flown by people that are located thousands of miles away?
Right. So some of the efforts with RTCA will help inform those decisions. The big hurdles there are the detect and avoid and the command and control. And the command and control, both terrestrial and satellite based. So when we can figure the standards out for those hurdles, then those operations should be available as long as they comply with all the other rules.
Okay.
So yes.
The follow-up to that would be, what is the thought on the requirement that there'll be surveillance capability of UASs that are operating, either from air traffic control being able to see them and clearly identify them, as well as aircraft that are equipped with ADS-B, and what would be the communications requirement for the UAS in terms of talking to other aircraft or air traffic control?
Right. So those questions, I don't have the information to answer that now, and there's some of the very things that we are looking at as far as the communication challenges with the operator being on the ground, but yet and not moving, but yet the aircraft is moving through different sectors and having a party line capability for the link that goes to air traffic. It's something that we're looking at.
Okay. Does the requirement for the model aircraft people of 5 miles from the airport also specifically define heliports as a requirement? I mean, the situation we would look at would be something akin to the New York City heliport system, which has over 100,000 operations a year.
Right.
Is that identified as, this is inclusive of not only airports 5 miles, but you can't go near a heliport that's 5 miles from you? I'm sorry? Yeah, public and private heliports, yes.
I can look it up. I believe it says just airport, but I mean, I've got it in here.
Okay. Is there some consideration we can get that you add heliports to that requirement? Because the obvious danger is clear.
So I would have to, I believe the language for that actually came out of congressional language. So.
Well, that's scary.
That we can't
no,
add
congressional
to that.
language.
I mean, the good thing is most of the heliports are in the cities, so over built-up areas. Well, I mean, like in New York City, right?
No. I mean, I agree. The extreme example is L.A., Chicago, New York. But that being said, heliports are located everywhere in this country, and certainly in remote areas that are fairly busy for a particular company or activity.
Right.
There are sightseeing heliports that people operate air tours from that are in the middle of nowhere. There just happens to be a particular geographic location or national monument or something that the people want to see.
Okay.
So you could be in North Dakota or in the Grand Canyon in the middle of nowhere, and there's heliports with helicopters flying all over.
Okay. I mean, I think that we may have, like the NOTAM, would help. I think we have some things that are already in place, but to ensure that I don't oversimplify the problem, I think
Sure.
if I could have the dialogue with you
Yeah.
to understand, then that may help better
Absolutely.
inform us, and that's
Well,
we
I think
can
it's
use that
simple. We're,
information.
obviously, we all agree that these UASs should not operate within 5 nautical miles of an airport for a logical reason. There's the potential conflict between them and the aircraft.
Right.
The same exact scenario exists at a heliport.
Right.
You know,
Keep in mind, it
so-
didn't say they should not operate. It said they should inform.
Well, inform, whatever.
Right.
Yeah.
But I would definitely appreciate the dialogue.
Okay, great.
you know,
We'll
offline.
make sure we follow up on that
Okay.
one. See if we can get heliports in there. The other one is, do you envision at a given point, and the reason we bring this up, and I'm sensitive to it, is anybody can buy a UAS on the internet or walk into a hobby shop.
Right.
Is there any point that the FAA considers a requirement or a mandate on the manufacturers of the UAS or the vendors that sell them to provide the buyer with collateral material that advises them of the obligation under the rule of 5 miles, 400 feet weight? Because right now, nobody, I believe, nobody that buys these things, the kids, their parents, adults that want them, either internet or hobby shop, has a clue that any of these things exist.
Absolutely.
They just don't know. So
Right.
the point would be the manufacturer should put something in the box related with FAA requirements, or the vendor also should be, required to do it.
Right. So my boss, Jim Williams, actually first week of January attended the CES
Yeah.
out in Las Vegas.
Right.
And interacted with some of the manufacturers there. And they have agreed that they will put our know before you fly
Okay.
information in their boxes. So we're looking, I think there was 5 of them, and I'm sorry I can't name them off the top of my head. But that is exactly the type of things that we're looking to do. So it's a start.
Okay, great.
And Amazon also, we
Yeah.
have worked with Amazon, and when you go to buy a UAS on Amazon, there is a link
Yeah.
for information about what you need to know before you fly. And Amazon had reached out to us and actually asked us, hey, does this make sense? Is this? And I think they actually have a link somewhere. I haven't went to the page, but I understand that somewhere along the process of ordering one, you get an opportunity to review
Great.
safety information.
Funny you mentioned Amazon. That was the next question. How does the FAA view the proposed program that Amazon is going to implement, supposedly, of providing 30 to 45-minute delivery of a product after you order it using UAS?
I don't have the information to comment on that.
Okay.
Sorry.
Fair enough. We just have this vision of, thousands of these things flying all over the country delivering these packages. And we're going to be in the middle of that, and it's kind of daunting, quite frankly. In terms of enforcement, I know there was, and that's something we're concerned about, because right now, as far as we know, anybody can buy one of these things, use it recreational, personal, private use as a hobby, and do whatever they want with it within the confines, if they know about the 400 feet and the 5 miles. And if, in fact, they do something that is untoward, or creates a situation of concern, there doesn't seem to be any enforcement at this point against them. They haven't violated any rules or regulations or laws. And the example I use for that is there's a video of a gentleman who launched a UAS off of a high-rise apartment building in the middle of Manhattan off the terrace. And the video itself is spectacular. He flew through the buildings over Central Park, and he hit a building. And the UAS fell to the street and actually hit a gentleman. And the gentleman turned it into the New York City Police Department. The FAA indicated they had no jurisdiction. The NYPD investigated, and they found out neither did they. There's no laws that address this. And this gentleman basically was, here's your UAV or UAS, be careful.
Okay.
And that was the end of it. So how do you address that it seems unconstrained, these people can do stuff, and if an event like that is where they actually hit someone or destroys property, nobody seems to be able to touch them.
Right. So the FAA does believe that we have the authority for civil penalties on operators, and there's a couple of cases where civil penalties have been levied. And actually one of them was a guy in New York City that flew off of his balcony, the wind caught it, and sent it down. It didn't hit a person, it hit the sidewalk. So I am not
Yeah,
familiar
this
with the
hit a
one.
person, and the
but
person's the one that turned it in.
That person
Yeah.
actually paid a civil penalty.
Ah, okay.
And there's other examples where we've pursued the careless and reckless.
Yes.
So under the
Yeah.
our authority, we pursue under careless and reckless.
And this is related to the recent reversal in the court decision by the NTSB?
The Perker case?
Yes.
Correct. Can everybody
Okay.
still hear me? If you can't, just holler.
Okay,
Correct.
great.
So, I mean, again, our goal is to do education. Richmond, Virginia, run into the bulls. Someone was flying a quadcopter. It went down and hit somebody. They ended up getting stitches. We addressed that. It didn't take a civil penalty to get that in line. Others, again, we go for the education. There's a lot of other, warning letters and stuff in between before we get to civil penalty.
Yeah.
But if we find that if it's a high risk, medium or high risk to the NAS, or they're uncooperative, we have that authority under the careless and reckless, and have used it, and it's been upheld.
Oh, that's great. I'm trying to, no, I think we answered that one. Okay. I'm good from my end. Did anybody else have it? Oh,
Yeah,
Jeff.
just one more, and thanks for,
Yeah.
Matt, for teeing that up. My question actually is, what is going to be the requirement for these operators, no matter in what capacity they are, to have some kind of liability insurance or anything like the rest of us, or the rest of the aviation operators have liability insurance coverage? There's manufacturer liability and all of that. Is that being also put into this whole program, what those operators are going to need to have?
I know we required the test sites to have the insurance. I don't know about the what we're coining as the Section 333 approvals. So that's probably something that I'd go back and look at. I'll have to get back with you on that. Appreciate the
Thanks.
question.
Just a very quick follow-up to something Matt brought up. I happened to buy one of these on Amazon last month.
Yes.
And I didn't get directed to anything at all that told me anything about how I could use it.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay.
Has anybody else had a similar experience? Okay.
Oh, that's nice.
So the link is at the bottom.
Oh, that's
Okay, good. Thank you.
Yeah.
I've got 2 due outs. I'm going to have to help you review those.
And let me just check before I check out to make sure we didn't get any other submissions from the internet. Okay. Let's see what this question is. How is the FAA addressing maintenance, inspection, and determination of airworthiness prior to flight of UAS?
So I know I've got a couple of our policy office maintenance folks out there in the audience. I won't put them on the spot yet. So again, with models, there's
Nothing.
no requirement. With
Right.
the public, they certify their own. So we're really talking about the civil.
Yes.
So we take the risk-based process. Our focus with the Section 333 so far has really been more towards, if something does happen, make sure it doesn't hurt anybody. So not if it, one of the things with unmanned aircraft is the nice thing is they're expendable because there's no pilot on them.
Yep.
And I remember one time when I was a captain in the military, we put a Hunter UAV in the side of a mountain. The first question from the first general officer in the chain of command wasn't what happened, it was how many do you have left? and that to me really just kind of displays the different mindset on a UAV or an unmanned aircraft hitting the dirt versus a manned aircraft. I mean,
Sure.
It's a different mentality, I think, that manned aviation, those of us that grew up in manned aviation don't immediately get that perspective. It's just not natural. So it hit me that day when I was a young captain. But with the Section 333 approvals, our concern is that it doesn't hurt anybody. So, we're not going through and saying, well, are you checking the torque on the propeller? I mean, some of these things have rubber bands on them, so how do you,
Sure.
put standards on that? And then when you start doing those standards, it's not economically feasible, then you won't have any applicants under Section 333. So I guess I tend to oversimplify things, but if we can guarantee that that aircraft isn't heavy enough, fast enough, or uncontrollable enough to hurt anyone, then we really don't worry if it.
Fair enough.
That's kind of unnatural for me to say that being a manned aviation, but
No,
really that's our perspective. And
Okay, that's fair enough.
Right.
Change hats now from modifier to operator. A couple things concern me in that. This 55-pound rule, how did that come about? I ask because a 5-pound duck makes a mess when it hits a helicopter, but a 5-pound UAV is going to have a fatality. So
Right.
how did you get this 55-pound thing?
I don't know. I really don't. I know that there are other countries out there that have come forward and come up with different weights, and whether they're frangible or whether they're not. We are looking to do research on some of this, and the other thing is when we release the NPRM, we really expect a lot of comments, and I think some of these comments like this will have to be addressed whenever we get comments on the small rule.
Okay.
I don't know. It's been around it's been around before I got into the office, and honestly, I'm not sure. I don't know if anybody else in the audience wants to step out on that or not. But
We're getting about one near miss about every 5 or 6 weeks right now in our operation, and we're not near the largest EMS operator in the country or largest helicopter operator. And the FAA has been fairly responsive when those are reported to try to figure out where they are and what happened. So I appreciate that, but it is getting. I don't know what your statistics are, but it's probably the highest threat level or risk level we're facing right now in that area.
Right.
The other thing that's concerning to me is this line of sight. My vision, I can see this thing about maybe 100 yards out. Okay, if that's line of sight, then I'm limited at 100 yards. But if line of sight, when you speak about radio transmissions or actually how far you can see out, that could reach out 10 miles depending on where you're
we specify
at.
visual line of sight without any visual aid other than corrective lenses.
Mine or yours or
Yes.
But your visual also, you're running these things off an iPad and can see, reach that thing way out.
It's visual line of sight with the aircraft. With
As a personal note, that line of sight ended up in my neighbor's tree, so that's just, anyway, that's where mine ended up. But anyway, I appreciate it, but that is the highest threat. One last thing is we've had a near miss with a Navy drone, and they launched this thing at one of their functions that we were participating in with no notice to us. And there's no traffic avoidance. They're flying these things without transponders that we know of, or not civil transponders. But is there any talk or any conversation with the military on these things?
Right. So with the military, what they need from the FAA is the COA to address the 91-113 part. I mean, I don't know where this incident was. Let me back up. If they're flying in restricted airspace, they don't need to come to the FAA.
It wasn't restricted. It was public.
Okay. I'm not sure. I mean, the ones that we've approved, I believe all have transponders on them. At least the bigger ones I know do. So I'm not sure. I would like, and I'm glad you brought up the point about the near midair, because that's a key word that's a serious threshold for the FAA. A sighting is significantly different than a near midair collision, and there's a different process that kind of gets up-leveled for the considerations on the near midair collisions. So if you are actually having and I don't exactly remember what the parameters are, but if you're taking evasive action and it is a near midair, make sure you include that information in your report, because I don't read all the reports. We probably get about maybe 30 or 40 a month. Most of them don't. They're just sightings, and they're not near midair. So that's significant information to include on the report.
I think these were mostly near misses or near midairs.
Okay.
So, anyway, thank you.
All right.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. One quick question for you. I agree with you. From an operator standpoint, I'm more concerned with the hobbyists than I am the guys who are certified or have the exemption, because they understand the rule.
Right.
But, as Milton just indicated, the gentleman from NIMSPA, from a helicopter operator standpoint, we're already having these encounters with these UASs out there. We've been delayed going into scenes because there's a UAS that had to be taken out of there.
Right.
So I guess my comment is, and I preface this that I know this is a new program for the FAA, and I know you're doing what you can to get a hold of this, but as operators, we're trying to work with the FAA SMS, and what we look at is probability, and if that occurs, what's the result?
Right.
So the way I look at this is our probability is growing because these things are getting out there more and more all the time. They can obviously have a catastrophic result. So I can just envision us in a year or two sitting in a meeting just like this, talking about the first fatal accident that's occurred because of the mid-air collision between one of these and one of these aircraft. So again, looking at it from an SMS standpoint, it seems that we've got to get a grip on this before we have that first accident.
Right.
Be predictive to what is going to occur. So from an operator standpoint, again, I hope I don't want it to be my aircraft. I don't want it to be any of the operator's aircraft.
Right.
So just a comment.
Fair enough.
Thank you.
Okay. All right, I think we're good? All right.
Okay.
Well, thanks so much.
Well, just let me close out real
Yeah,
quick
please.
by saying, a lot of the stuff is new. The FAA continues to learn and continues to try to improve, the process. So, where we maybe issue COAs today, maybe it'll be exemptions, in the future. There's other ways that we'll find to move forward and increase the safety. And the feedback from, groups like this will be very valuable to us to take a community approach. Because like I said, our office isn't big enough to make this a success on its own. We need the engagement and input from everybody. So I definitely appreciate the input. I know I got a couple of due-outs that I'll get back with Dave on to help close out. So,
Well, thanks so much, Bill. I really appreciate it. It was a great session on
you.
UAS. It really was. All right, thank you.